When I started here in 1973, that whole township east of Johns Bridge didn't even have a road on it. And it was all mature softwood. It was like this great big area up here that was just prime for budworm. And then it hit. I remember when I first started hearing it, 1975, 76. Oh, there's evidence of budworm. What's that? You can heard it. Oh, it's going to be a problem. Then it kept getting worse for several years. Of course, the state administered the monitoring when they were spraying to kill the budworm. I mean, this was a massive spray program back then. They'd have big 2- and 4-engine aircraft, I mean, 5 and 6 of them, one right behind another, just covering massive swaths of the forest. It kept the trees alive so that it bought you some time so that you could get in there and harvest it. Right at the end of the feeding, in like June and so forth, you could fly and look out across everything you could see, and it would be all red. The needles turn red once they've been fed on. You knew you'd had a significant feeding that year. And the fir, typically 1 year or 2 years of heavy feeding, that was going to be it. It was dead. You had, especially with balsam fir, 1 year, maybe 2 to salvage it, or it was gone. One of the big problems at that time, there was no road. First, you had to establish a road there. But it was just incredible, the amount of damage.
We thought we were ready the last time, and we weren't. Through the 60s into the 70s, there'd been like 500,000 acres a year, 300,000, 400,000, you know, and it kind of stayed in that range. Had it continued to stay in that kind of a build-up pattern, it probably been much more manageable. I mean, the concept that we're prepared to deal with this was we were prepared to deal with what people had seen. Then what we saw was something much bigger. We were beginning to see spots build up in the western part of the state. And then we got a big in-flight coming in from Quebec. And within a year, we were looking at the whole north part of the state. The northern third, northern half was infested at some level, and much of it was very significant. Things died faster than people expected. It built up faster. It didn't stay on the east side and slowly spread out. All of a sudden, we were looking at a 3.5 million acre spray project. I mean, this is unheard of in Maine.
70s, 80s outbreak of spruce budworm was the equivalent of fire, slow fire, fire that lit and began burning and lasted 5 years, 6 years, 7 years as it killed the trees, but was just vast in its area and extraordinary in the high population densities that the moths seem to be able during egg-laying season to find every fir tree, every spruce tree on the landscape, up to high altitudes in the western mountains, perched stands of conifers, isolated from conifers in general. Can recall seeing them intensely defoliated. Had to be by north flights. Just extraordinary high density.
To me, as I remember right, it seemed like the end of the world, the end of our industry. The budworm is a sloppy eater. And what it does is it will take a needle and eat a little bit and then spin a web and leap it and go on to the next needle and so on and on and on. And so what you do is you end up with a forest full of dead needles which turn red. So in July, you end up with a forest that, as far as you can see, looks like it's a flame. And after that, in later July, the needles, the red needles fall off, and it's just this dull, gray look. And then if you get 2 or 3 years of epidemic going on, then it's just dead. It's just so massive that unless you've been through it, you can't believe it.
Somewhere in the early 70s, 72, 73, I was on the Allagash River taking a canoe trip, and had gotten up to an Eagle Lake. I would be sitting there reading outside, and I'd have these strands coming down, and they were all over the tent, they were all over everything. They were budworm larvae. Forest products industry harvests fur for pulp and paper, and the budworm wants it also. So the question was, do we allow this entire forest to be defoliated and be destroyed? And you couldn't do that because Maine's economy in the northern 10 million acres of the state depended on the wood supply.
We saw what the forest would look like had we not provided the protection. It was devastated. There were no living balsam fir in those stands. I happened to sit on the pesticide control board at the end of the project in 1983, 1984, and there were a lot of people concerned about the chemicals that were being sprayed in the woods. They became aware of that and were very, very worried about it. But I felt like the projects that were being done properly and were being done safely and protected the public from unnecessary exposure. There were predictions that there would be a dire shortage of fiber out there, both softwood and hardwood, in 2008 and 2010. All the models predicted that. We didn't have it. And I like to believe that is because after we created those large stands, we really managed the woods appropriately, whether it be planting, pre-commercial thinning, spraying. We managed the forest the way it's supposed to be, and we got through this potential dip that was out there.
It's a battle, but it's not really a win-lose battle per se. It's really more, can you manage the resource in such a way that you don't lose too many trees, so that you don't lose as many of them as would die if you just let the budworm go unchecked. The thing is, when you're in the midst of a heavy outbreak like the last one that we had, you have a pretty limited set of tools. So you basically can spray, and the whole program started off with different chemical sprays, and then it evolved more to biological agents. But then you have the tools of harvest it before it dies and becomes unusable. You never really completely eliminated the damage or even completely eliminated the budworm. So the objective wasn't to eliminate the budworm, because we knew it was going to go in its cycle regardless. The goal was to save enough trees to not do economic damage. You know, it wasn't 100% successful, but it made a significant difference. I mean, it was, you know, noticeable to the naked eye that you had trees with more green foliage on them, and therefore trees that were staying alive, compared to, you know, when we would look at completely untreated areas. There was certainly a lot less tree mortality where they were protected.
I can remember climbing Mount Katahdin and looking down at thousands of acres of just gray trees, standing skeletons. When you had entire stands of trees dying at a time, hundreds, thousands of acres at a time, it was definitely changing the habitat for the critters. The birds responded very quickly. They're the ones that you saw increases in population. There are certain species that feed on budworm and actually increase their numbers. And the last go around was devastating to deer habitat. Deer require mature softwood cover. Most of our softwood cover is composed of balsam fir. Balsam fir is the most susceptible to the budworm. And we're at a low ebb in the cycle as a result of the epidemic that took place in the 70s and 80s.
Well, we've got a young, healthy forest, we're okay. That's what some people say. No, fir is fir. If the budworm comes, who knows?
I don't think we're looking at the 70s right this minute, but I could be wrong. But I think being prepared is the answer. I mean, making your plans on hope is truly lovely, but it's not wise.
If there's anything that I am just profoundly grateful for, it's that in this outbreak, we are undertaking in advance to manage the resource in such a fashion that we will reduce its vulnerability and reduce the need to the extent we can for protection. Every outbreak up until now has come as a surprise, without preparation.
important for legislators to get out of Augusta and to go actually see the forests, because there are many who haven't seen the forests and don't understand some of the cutting practices and so on. So it's important not to take just people's words for things, but to go out and see what's going on.
The most important thing we need to do is we really have to communicate with the public, and the public needs to know why we're doing what we're doing.
So you kind of have to plan for the worst. And if you get something that isn't the worst case scenario, great.
I think the important thing to remember about the budworm is it's a natural epidemic. It comes periodically. And to think that we're going to control it is, I think we'd be naive to think that. It's going to control us.
We were there in the battle, we remember, and we've made a commitment that it's not going to happen again on our watch, to be unprepared.
Probably the best way to look at it is look at what's going on in Quebec right now. Since the last 10 years, we've been seeing a build-up. In the last 3 or 4, it's gone from 6 million, we're up over 10 million now. It had been entirely on the North Shore, and now we have a problem on the South Shore. It's gotten as far down as around St. Florence, which is really only about 80 miles away from Maine. It's down right up against the New Brunswick Panhandle in the northwestern New Brunswick. And it's not just that there is some defoliation, we're talking about heavy defoliation. It's beginning to spread up on the South Shore up into the Gas Bay. So what had been trapped on the North Shore is now on the South. It's building up. We look at the New Brunswick situation, and their pheromone catches are up, have been the last few years. Very similar to Maine situation. We're seeing kind of up and down and spread. When I say pheromone trap catches, we're talking about moths. We know there was a big moth flight up in Rimouski here in 2013. We have reason to believe that some of those moths may have influenced our trap catches as well. We've got some of the moth activity coming into the light traps, which we check daily, was not congruent with a local population, different timing. So we think that some of them we were blessed by the neighbors, so it's, the moth catches are up. The moth catches are up in Quebec, on the South Shore. Moth catches are up in adjacent New Brunswick. It very much matches the situation in Maine, where it's the northern part of the state where we have the heaviest catches. The southern part of the state, it drops off. Our population did not build up as much this year as it did the year before, but we're way up from where we were 2-3 years ago. And that matches the New Brunswick situation. I don't think we're looking at defoliation this coming year. However, up in New Brunswick, where they've had the hot spots, they've gone back and they've looked with larval samples, kind of looking at what next year's population will be. And they've got a couple spots where they think they're going to see light defoliation next year, up around Campbellton in particular, right up against Bay Chaleur. So we're probably a year, maybe 2 years behind them. We're not right at the front of the outbreak. We're kind of on the side, so it's kind of spreading to the side towards us. I don't think we're going to get out of this. I mean, I'd like to think that we're going to pass us by. I don't think it's going to happen. So now's the time for us to be thinking about what we're going to do. We are at the start of an outbreak. We don't know how bad. We don't know exactly where. But we are seeing a buildup of budworm populations. We have plenty of fur out there to provide real estate for them to feed on. The pasture's there. So we wait and see. Prepare.